especially in the setting of the 53rd virtual annual meeting of the bank. So today is the day when the ADB huddles together with people they are comfortable with within closed doors. But tomorrow, the annual meeting is open, 17th and 18th of September 2020. Why are we rallying here? I mean, normally, of course, we would be right there in their face, pushing at them. And when we are faced with this virtual annual meeting, that we see that there is a kind of forced exclusion of CSOs from the meeting, we are obviously because really the AGM space is one space that many CSOs have used to amplify what communities on the ground are facing vis-a-vis ADB projects. We know many ADB projects have been dirty, destructive over the years, and the annual meeting is a space where we can hope to push for some change. There are many CSOs that do not want to engage with the ADB. There are some that do. But I don't think we can leave it to the ADB to decide that nobody needs to engage with them, which is why we decided, even if we cannot get there in the face, on the streets, in our communities because of the pandemic, we thought it is important to register our protest, at least online. And therefore, I welcome all of you to this online protest rally. It's put together, of course, by the old basher and pusher at the ADB, the NGO forum on ADB. It's also, brought to you by the Asia Europe People's Forum, AEPF, the Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development, APMDD, the Building and Woodworkers International, BWI, the Center for Energy, Ecology and Development, SEED, the Philippine Movement for Climate Justice, PMCJ, together with Clean Coastal Livelihood and Environmental Action Network in Bangladesh, and INSAF, Indian Social Action Forum, together with so many CSOs around the world who are concerned as to which way the ADB is going. Welcome remarks, of course, by Sridhar Ramamurthy, who's the International Committee convener of the NGO Forum on ADB and the Managing Trustee of Environix Trust in India. Sridhar, why are we here today? Sridhar, don't leave us even before we start. There you are, Sridhar.
Very, very good morning and good afternoon, and welcome all to this virtual rally against the Asian Development Bank. And it's essentially the kind of growing tendency and the kind of policies that it is persisting with. This year, this rally is even more important because not only with the Asian Development Bank, but led by banks like ADB, lots of governments have kind of thrown to winds almost all the safeguards. If you look at ADB itself, taking the cover of COVID, what it has done is most of the COVID loans that are being granted to different countries, and I believe that ADB has mobilized so far between $31 to $41 billion on the COVID. A part of that has been allowed to be used, at least very clearly in India, for whatever expenses it made even prior to COVID. So we don't know if the money was used to have a Trump Modi, kind of rally in India, or was it used for another meeting with, the legislators in some of these states where they bought and sold legislators. So there was money, free money that was available to the governments. And then it says, a good part of the money will have no conditions. And therefore, if you are able to spend money or have spent money and then account for, then where are the environmental safeguards? Where are the social safeguards? And where are the pure financial safeguards of where the money is used? And later on, we are still battling with, corruption issues on purchase of ventilators, if nothing at all, things of that kind, which are life-saving material. So this year is very, very important that how the the pandemic is being used not to bring in compassion among the kind of work that we do, but as if it's the way it is conceived as a battle, and in a battle, the uh, the opposition doesn't seem to be the virus. The opposition seems to be the poor, because uh, they simply seem to want to eliminate the poor, just as we saw thousands of deaths of just migrant workers in India. Then we are seeing that you know they are dying out of just sheer hunger now, because the economy is in such a bad shape. And we are also seeing that the concessions that are being given to the corporates, the three big corporates in India, the Ambanis and the Adanis, have their market capitalization almost kind of increased to 1.5 times of their pre-COVID kind of market capitalization. So I would welcome you to this today's rally, uh, and to emphasize that while it should have been easier for the Asian Development Bank to have exclusive sessions, with civil society, even the almost mandatory session with the NGO forum, the bank has escaped in the name of COVID. So while all of us are battling, our own problems of near and dear ones being affected by the pandemic, being affected by the economy, and while our own governments are becoming more and more repressive, uh, the bank, which is finding this as an opportunity to push its money, has got to be questioned, and questioned in various ways for its behavior. I welcome all of you once again, and look forward to a very, very powerful rally today, that even virtually, even if it is conducted virtually, it goes into the real ears of ADB and its board of directors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sridhar, for those opening remarks. And you've set the tone for why we are here. I really think it's important because we have been pushing at ADB to be more accountable, but we know that there are communities on the ground that have been suffering the ill effects. We thought we'll give you a snapshot of what ADB has done on the ground, not, of course, a very comprehensive one, but just something. Jen, would you help us with that? Jen is with comms in the NGO forum, and there, the Mark Hopper mining disaster in the Philippines, and in Bangladesh, the Fulbari coal project that we have all heard about. Some have participated in rallies against them. Um, I remember in the early days, early 2000s, we used to call the ADB the Asian Destructive Bank. And this is why. Oh, I must say, it's not the early days of the ADB, it's the early days of my engagement against the ADB. But yes, the Kaligandaki, a hydroelectric project in Nepal, and several across Asia. And that's why it's very important that Asian people do come together to speak up against what they like to project as our bank. So here we are, and we shall not be silenced. The pandemic will not silence us. We will use the spaces that we have to amplify the concerns of the communities on the ground. And we go right into what is staring all of us in the face even more clearly and keenly, the debt crisis. We know that ADB and banks like the ADB have contributed to the debt crisis that is now exacerbated by the pandemic. Rene, Professor, as we like to call him, Rene, who's Dr. Rene of Renio, President of the Freedom from Debt Coalition Philippines. We'd love to hear from you, sir.
Oh, good morning, Bija. Good morning,
Good
everybody.
morning.
Well, these are really challenging times for all of us. As Bija mentioned, the debt crisis is upon us, in many countries of Asia, partner countries of ADB. The aggravated, of course, by the COVID pandemic. And the COVID pandemic, let me just summarize, has bared the following. Number one, the healthcare system is broken in many countries. I will not mention the countries, but of course, my country included. Second, the system of distributing public goods in crisis times is also underdeveloped and missing. So many people go hungry and helpless. Third, as we know, social distancing and also global distancing, isolating countries, have flattened the economies of Asia Pacific. And as a result, joblessness, poverty, widespread. And amidst all of this, you have this soaring debt. So what is the response of the ADB to all of this? And that's what I would like to find out in these coming days. But their agenda, when I look at them, lacks boldness. And then as mentioned earlier by Sridhar and others, there's a problem of transparency. They came up with a $20 billion window for, lending for COVID projects. It used to be 6 billion, but they increased it to 20 billion. India, Indonesia, Pakistan, Philippines, the first 4 countries given loans under this CARE, they call it CARE program. The name is dangerous because it doesn't care for people, because when you look at the details, it's still talk of the old way of lending, going back to the normal, assuming the projections made by neoliberal economies of the different governments. And what the projections made in April are already so different from what's happening now. And the most dangerous of all is their emphasis on the role of the private sector. You know, ADB has a strategy 2030. Under strategy 2030, one major chapter there is on the role of the private sector. And when they talk of the private sector, it's the big corporations. And it's they are hoping that 2/3 or at least half of the lending will be provided by the private sector. But what is the role of the private sector? Building dams, building power plants, building roads, operating and managing all of these infrastructure projects. Incidentally, ADB is the pioneer in this program called privatization. Way back in the 1970s, they already formulated the concept of co-financing, eventually becoming a privatization program. And what has privatization given to the world is part now of the structural adjustment program of the neoliberals. But in the Philippines, in 1997, 1998, after the Asian financial crisis, the ADB came up with a study on how to strengthen so-called the power sector. And they give us this study on privatizing this national power corporation. And what happened is we privatize power generation, privatize transmission, power, privatize distribution, and try to privatize this limited market. But what happened? The public monopoly has become a private oligopoly. And we have soaring, prices of electricity. And that is the danger here. There's no assessment of this. In the meantime, ADB is talking of climate resiliency, inclusion. They have borrowed the language of the civil society. Just like the IMF and the World Bank now, they're talking about using the vocabulary of the civil society, people empowerment, etc. But can they walk the talk? That's the problem. And so we have to push ADB to be transparent, to be really people-oriented, to review this privatization program, to admit their obligation or responsibility in pushing this dangerous and irresponsible structural adjustment program pushed by the IMF and World Bank in the last 3 or 4 decades. And it has not done the world, Asia, any good. We need to build a new economic order in Asia Pacific, and that's what ADB should be doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rene. Thank you. And now let's hear it from Bangladesh. We Hassan Mahdi, Chief Executive of CLEAN, Coastal Livelihood and Environmental Action Network, Bangladesh, and the International Committee member from South Asia in the NGO Forum on ADB. Mahdi.
Thank you. Thank you, Vidya. After during this pandemic in April, my father had a heart attack, and we had to run to the hospital in the late night, but there was no doctor, and there was nobody to respond us why there is no doctor, and where should we go. And now ADB is doing the same, and we can't go anywhere to ask them why they are doing this. And ADB almost blocked us, and we don't care that. We are here together to say that we don't care actually. So in last 4 decades, ADB has provided around $24 billion to Bangladesh, which is almost 40% of total loan, and most of the money has gone to the energy sector, transport, and even all the private sectors. So to repay the loan, Bangladesh has to pay 18% of its total budget, which means the amount is larger than the food and agriculture, larger than the education budget, larger than the health budget. So all the health service has gone to the private sector, and the people that don't have any access to the universal health. So now, after this pandemic, thousands of the organizations, including NGO Forum and ADB and all, we demanded that suspend the loan services or end the loan services, at least suspend it. But they didn't do it. They actually given more loan to the countries like Bangladesh in the name of COVID response, and the finance again went to the corporate garment sector, corporate hospitals, corporate different services. So now this is become like, if we want to get only oxygen cylinder, we have to pay around $250, which is totally out of beyond the capability of the poor people. So now the money which ADB and other IFIs has provided has gone to the corporate corrupted bureaucrats. So this is the time we have to say that in like in 2010 and 2012, when we used to say that make ADB accountable every dollar everywhere. Thank you very much.
Yes, Mehdi, make ADB accountable. Every dollar, everywhere. Do we all want to say this together? Make ADB accountable. Please unmute yourselves. Are we allowed to unmute ourselves? Jen, the
Yes,
bank
please do
might
so.
mute us out, but we cannot be silent. So everyone, please unmute yourself and join me in telling ADB, as Mehdi said, if they don't like us, we don't care. We will do our bit of speaking up for the communities. Well, and as Glenn said, ADB don't like us, we don't care, we didn't like you either, ever, ever, ever. So let's hear it. Willie, let's hear it. ADB don't like us. Let's hear
We
it.
don't care.
Don't care.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
We do not care. And ADB cancelled debt immediately. No to loans for COVID relief. I think that's
No
the
to
other
loan.
message that came
No
out
to
very.
loans.
Yes,
Oh,
Mehdi, why don't you lead us through these, you know?
Meaning,
Yes, yes, yes.
okay, first line
Yes.
is make ADB accountable. Then you should say that everywhere, every dollar. I will say make ADB accountable.
Make
You will
ADB
say,
accountable.
I say make ADB accountable. Everybody will join me with everywhere, every dollar. Let's start.
Okay.
Make
And
ADB
typing.
accountable. Make ADB
Everywhere.
accountable.
every
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 dollar.
dollar.
dollar, everywhere.
Every dollar.
Make ADB accountable.
Everywhere,
Every
every
dollar.
dollar.
Make ADB accountable.
Every
Everywhere, every
Every
dollar.
dollar.
Dollar everywhere.
Thank you.
Thanks, thanks,
dollar
Mehdi.
everywhere.
Yes, and even as we continue to say that the ADB must cancel all debt repayments immediately, at least till the next financial year, let us move on to our other engaging concern. Or shall we have some photos, Jen, from actions in different countries, from different movements, or do we go on to the next speaker, who I assure you is a fiery,
Let's go
feisty
with the next
speaker?
speaker. Let's not drown down the momentum. Let's go to the next speaker.
Okay, okay, thanks, Jen. So let me call upon Liddy Nakpil, coordinator of the Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development, APMDD, based in the Philippines, roving ambassador on our energy concerns across the world. Liddy.
Thank you, Vidya. Turning on my video. Hopefully it doesn't affect the sound.
No,
Yes,
you're coming up clearly. Yes.
I've been asked to speak on the energy policy of ADB, and this is one of the longest battle that many movements in Asia have been fighting, the energy policy and involvement of ADB in coal and fossil fuels. As many past executive directors of the NGO Forum on the ADB knows, this has been more than 15 years, I think, of a battle to address and challenge the policy of the ADB. We had an initial victory in the new energy plan in 2009 when it made a sort of a little bit improved policy on coal financing. But of course, it was not a complete victory. ADB policy on coal became sort of the standard of other banks who want to look good on paper, but actually policy that still had loopholes and allowed and enabled banks to continue to finance coal under quote unquote certain conditions. And that is actually what the ADB has done in 2009. It would appear that they would be much more strict on financing coal. But what happened is, of course, after 2009, they continued to finance coal projects. They, I'm sorry, there's some sound on the part of my computer. So we want to make sure that this time the ADB really continues on its path towards total coal exit. And we have been encouraged lately that the IED, the Internal Evaluation Department of the ADB, issued a report, quite a long report, but the most significant section for that, for energy campaigners, is its recommendation that the ADB totally gets out of coal. And the management has responded by saying that it will conduct immediately consultations among stakeholders, including civil society, about this recommendation. So we really need to push very hard so that we totally get ADB out of coal involvement and coal financing. And we need to make sure that we are there front and center in these consultations, but also not limited to the consultation spaces. The last point I want to make on this is that it's not about just coal, right? We still have oil, we still have gas, and ADB has been financing oil and gas quite significantly. Just only in the last 2.5 years, it has financed to more than $6 billion worth of oil and gas projects in several countries in Asia, as compared to just over $3 billion worth of renewable energy. So clearly, the commitment of ADB to promoting fossil fuels is much greater than its avowed commitment to supporting clean energy in Asia. So we need to fight that fight. Those of us who have been fighting coal on the ground and also against the financing of coal, we need to take on this additional agenda of making sure they are also pushed out of oil and gas. Thank you very much and a good morning to you all.
Liddy, we aren't going to let you go. You need to lead the chant. ADB, stop funding the climate crisis. Total coal exit now.
Okay. So when I say ADB stop funding the climate crisis, people will respond, total coal exit now. Okay.
Yes, everyone unmute, please.
Again.
Yes. Yes.
Let's do it 3 times. So ADB stop funding the climate crisis.
Total coal exit.
The coal exit now.
ADB stop funding the climate crisis.
Total
coal exit now.
ADB stop funding the climate crisis.
Total coal
exit
now.
now.
Big Mohammed, I can't see your hand. Come on.
Exit from oil and gas too.
Exit from oil and gas ADB right now.
Okay, thank you very much, Lydia.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Liddy. And there we have Glenn Yamata from No Burn, Philippines. Glenn, do you have something to say to the ADB and to all of us too?
Yes, thank you, Vidya, and good morning to all of the organizations joining this online protest now. No Burn, Philippines, that ADB to stop funding waste to energy incineration projects, especially in developing member countries. ADB must refrain from investing in incinerators as energy development and waste strategies that systematically fail to take a no-do-harm, precautionary approach, prioritize climate resilience investment, or meet other basic principles outlined in ADB's own social and environmental safeguard standards. As we all know, ADB has just recently published its report on the evaluation of its energy policy from 2009 to 2019. And it says they are considering the recommendations to include waste to energy incineration as part of the circular economy and that of renewable energy mix. Actually, for the last 5 years, ADB has been facilitating negotiations between WTE operators and local government units in the Philippines, like the Quezon City, Cebu City, and Davao City. ADB is even supporting our Congress to enact a law that will allow incineration, one thing that our laws have already prohibited. Waste to energy incineration should not be associated with climate solutions or efforts toward a circular economy because this end pipe approach produces hazardous residue streams, blocks the implementation of zero waste strategies, and perpetuates the linear economic model of extraction, production, consumption, and disposal. Our demand to the ADB is predicated on the following. Number one, waste to energy incineration has no place in the circular economy. In fact, in the UE latest taxonomy report, waste to energy incineration has been included from the list of economic activities that are considered as sustainable finance. This list of sustainable finance activities refer to only those that can contribute to climate change mitigation without significantly impacting environmental objectives, such as transition to a circular economy, waste prevention, and recycling. One principle of a circular economy model is designing waste out of local and national systems. By continuing to fund waste to energy projects, ADB is preventing developing member countries from transitioning to an authentic circular economy, which they claim to promote in the region. Projects involving the burning of waste are reinforcing dependencies on finite resources and upholding unsustainable consumption because of its reliance on generated waste for its operations. Number two reason, WTE incineration is not a climate solution. Incinerators emit significant quantities of direct greenhouse gases and are large sources of indirect greenhouse gases. No other than the US Environmental Protection Agency states that incinerators emit more carbon dioxide per megawatt hour than coal-fired, natural gas-fired, or oil-fired power plants. Zero Waste Europe cites the high levels of carbon intensity produced in waste to energy incineration, which is 296 grams of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour. This means that carbon intensity of energy produced through waste incineration is already about 2 times greater than the current EU average electricity grid carbon intensity. Carbon intensity refers to the amount of CO2 emissions equivalent per unit of electricity generated or per unit of output. Under the electricity generation, the EU taxonomy requires activities to produce less than 100 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. A 2015 UNOMA study found that the management of waste as residual waste makes a net contribution to the climate change balance, and that there is not much difference between the landfill and incineration scenarios. Number three, waste to energy incineration is no better than coal. Waste to energy incinerators are fossil fuel based because plastic waste, which comprise a significant fraction of municipal discards, are largely used as feedstock. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change guidelines, when the CO2 emitted is fossil origin, it is counted as net anthropogenic emissions of CO2 to the atmosphere. Thus, the emission from waste to energy incineration is not different from that of coal-fired power plants. It is actually Number 4, waste to energy displaces people, jobs, and livelihoods. Like any other power plant projects, waste to energy incineration plants have the tendency to displace people from their communities where the facility will be constructed. Further, as WTEs assume the role of waste management, tens of thousands of households relying on waste picking and recycling will lose their jobs and livelihoods. On average, informal workers account for approximately 0.6% of the population. This translates to around 648,000 Filipinos that depend their livelihood on waste management sector based on the latest estimate of the country's population of 108 million. Incinerators burn and destroy finite resources that ought to be recycled and brought back to a productive economy. Hence, our organization, No Burn Pilipinas, urgently urges and advise the Asian Development Bank two main points. One, revise the energy policy to eliminate waste-to-energy incinerators from the list of renewable energy options to be financed and recommended. And two, explicitly promote zero-waste solutions for waste management concerns in borrowing member countries, as well as energy solutions that do not rely on the incineration of waste. Thank you, and more power.
Thank you so much, Glenn Yamata from Noburn, Filipinas. That was very clear. We are speaking what we want, despite the ADB trying to shut us out of the 53rd ADB annual meeting. It's virtual, and if we can rally virtually against the ADB, why does the ADB think that they cannot accommodate us tomorrow and day after during their AGM? There is no reason, there's no excuse, and we're not allowing them to get away with it. And therefore, on climate change, I call upon a very, very strong campaigner with roots on the ground, but coming to us via Zoom, Aaron Pedrosa from the Philippine Movement for Climate Justice. Let's hear it from Aaron.
Thank you, Vidya, and good morning to my colleagues here. The Philippines has been a poster child of climate
Aaron,
change.
I know you have a strong rallying voice and we need to hear it today. We can't hear the Aaron we know.
Pardon the voice. The Philippines has been a poster child of climate change impacts. And this has been shown during 2013 when we were struck by Haiyan. And despite that reality, we have international financial institutions like Asian Development Bank, who in the last 3 decades has funded at least four coal plants amounting to 2,350 megawatts. This has brought misery to communities and has devastated not only the environment but their livelihood, as well as contributed to their vulnerability to climate change impacts. Despite this, the Asian Development Bank continues to peddle the clean coal technology. The use of this so-called clean coal technology, or the circulating fluidized bed combustion technology, is 4 times deadlier compared to traditional or conventional coal plants, which the ADB has been funding in the 1990s and late 80s. And our experience, for example, in Naga, Cebu, where we forwarded a complaint on behalf of the affected communities, despite the communities saying no to coal plants, the ADB has not shut down the coal plant. Despite the Asian Development Bank board saying that the plant is not compliant to its own safeguards and guidelines, you have a 200 megawatt coal plant, a dirty energy coal plant or project still in operation. And that denies the reality Filipino people are facing today. And this is aggravated by the fact that we have a pandemic and we remain vulnerable to climate change crisis. But this all the way harks us back to the privatization of our power industry mentioned earlier by Professor and Dean of Reneo. It was no less the World Bank who funded the push or bankrolled the push to privatize our electricity sector. And the privatization has paved the way for the private sector determining what kind of energy source will be put up. And this has allowed the mushrooming of dirty energy projects like coal plants. And right now, as we speak, there's a 600 megawatt coal plant in the pipeline, which Asian Development Bank um, has committed to fund, despite its pronouncement to veer away the bank from dirty and harmful energy projects. So that is double talk. We don't want Asian Development Bank in our country funding these dirty and harmful deadly coal plants. We don't want ADB determining our fate, our future, because it has led a destructive track in the last 50 years. ADB out of Asia, ADB out of the Philippines now. Thank you.
ADB out of Asia, indeed, Aaron. Thank you so much. We know the work you do on the ground, PMCJ, and we are with you in all your fights, not just against ADB, but against all kinds of dirty energy, against, funding of fossil fuels. Thank you. And now let's go to another country which is battling on many fronts, such loans, such funders, and such dirty energy projects. Zakir Hussain Khan, Honorary Executive Director, Change Initiative Bangladesh. Zakir Bhai.
Thank you, Vidya, and other participants from different countries. It is really fascinating for me to join such an wide-based, this protest rally. Everyone knows that Bangladesh is one of the most climate vulnerable country among the world, actually. And recently, the trend of the cyclone, especially cyclone, has been increasing in last 10 years compared to the before the 10 years. So this is the most pressing things that Bangladesh needs adaptations very intensely. At least $2.5 billion is required per year. And not only Bangladesh and other LDCs are facing the same phenomena across the different countries. But what we have learned, that what is the major challenge is that in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the developed countries has already acknowledged that they should pay the compensations for their wrongdoings regarding the climates. But what we are actually experiencing that day by day, whenever it comes to their commitment, $100 billion per year, day by day, they are actually deviating from their commitments. They are now trying to impose the loans, and ADB is part of these games. And other multinational and multilateral development banks actually doing the same things. What we have learned in Bangladesh that they just using this climate crisis, ADB and other ADB or other financial institutions are trying to use that as an opportunity to make the money as a largest or a mega lending agency. And in Bangladesh, ADB is implementing a project. It is called the Coastal Climate Resilient Infrastructure Project. Since 2013, it is a $150 million project along with the KfW and other organizations. But at the grounds, what we have learned that they are abruptly just implementing several so-called routes, canals, growth centers, cyclone shelters, and so many things. But what is really the challenge is that in some cases we have found that they have already closed the several canals to construct the roads, and sometimes it has also, we have identified that around 25 to 30 cyclone shelters they have constructed, but several cyclone shelters have been constructed in the riverbanks, and which are more vulnerable to the erosions. And finally, some of them already in the way to just go down in the rivers. And finally, it will be actually wastage of resources. But what is the ultimate outcome? Outcome is that the lending money or the credit amounts from the ADB is a wastage of resources, but the burden has been given to the most climate vulnerable people who are already vulnerable due to the climate crisis. So the vulnerability is actually, in the name of climate, addressing climate vulnerability is actually expanding and extending in megafold. So this is the real challenges in the grounds that
Shut the fuck up, you stupid foreigner. I have something to say.
we don't want to just. Thank you very much. We want to just that the IDB should out of this climate crisis, and the fund should be granted, and the community-led adaptation approach would be best way to decide this. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Zakir Bhai, I think
Thank
our
you.
online rally has been digitally compromised. I've been noticing.
Zoom bomber.
Yeah.
Yep, we're hacked.
So we have moved them. That's the advantage. Well, I guess we need to keep ourselves open because we don't want to be ADB where they think that they will shut out the troublemakers. But if someone does create trouble, then we will, of course, take action. What Zakir and Aaron said really is indicative of what communities are struggling with when ADB projects come home to them. It's also clear from the kinds of responses we've got from some troubling elements that the fact that we are doing an online rally is not very comfortable to some. Let's now Jen, are you going to show us some? I thought you were going to show us some photos of people rallying against the ADB in different countries against their destructive and dirty projects. We are demanding, yes, thank you. So we are demanding that the ADB walk their talk. They talk all the right things in their fora and elsewhere, but we know from our communities on the ground that their projects are destructive. Here from the Philippines, the Visayas baseload power project. The Southern Transport Development Project in Sri Lanka. Most transportation projects are touted as, bringing lots of good to people in the public good, but we see that communities directly impacted by these projects are really in bad shape. The rehabilitation of the railway project in Cambodia, you see for yourself how it has played out and the havoc it has wrought into the lives of communities impacted by the railway. The Amu Bukhara Irrigation System Rehabilitation Project from Uzbekistan. Any project in the public good for the common good must actually improve the lives of people, improve the quality of life. Instead, we've seen that exactly the opposite happens. ADB will talk of their project like this North-South Road Corridor Investment Program in Armenia as if they are successful projects, but up close we know that they are really poorly executed, no proper consultation, no free prior informed consent, a very bad rehabilitation, and they fault on their own norms and their environmental and social safeguards. Here now, we will hear from BWI. And Apolinar Tolentino has been here with us. BWI, of course, is one of the co-organizers of this morning's rally against the ADB. Apolinar.
Good morning, comrades. I hope you can hear me well.
We can hear you very well.
Good.
Building and Woodworkers International.
Let's start with a good chant. When I say one struggle, one fight, you say, workers of the world unite.
Yes, let's unblock ourselves for this.
Okay.
Let's ask everyone.
Let's do it 3 times. When I say one struggle, one fight, you say, workers of the world unite. Okay. One struggle, one fight.
Workers of the world unite.
One struggle, one fight.
Workers of the world unite.
One struggle, one fight.
Workers of the world unite.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
start.
Yes, Dong.
The BWI is very proud to be part of this international online protest of the 53rd ADB annual governors meeting. What I will share to you is experience of the BWI and the NGO forum on ADB on our latest complaint against ADB funded project, infrastructure funded project in Himachal Pradesh, India. It's about the $400 million loans to the four laning. It's an express highway from Kiratpur to Nerchok Expressway in Himachal, India. The loan was approved through the India Infrastructure Finance Company Limited and in 2013. In the document, it indicated that the loan agreement in respect is due to close on 31st of December 2016. Eventually, on January 25th, 2017, the loan was closed. This is an important date because we will come back to this later on. As we organize the workers in this infrastructure project, we have, as usual, encountered a pattern of abuses and violation of basic national laws of the state of Himachal Pradesh and also as regards ILO international conventions, like non-payment of wages, absence of employment contracts, lack of social security coverage. Considering that Indian women construction workers were employed in the project, there's a lack of specific facilities for them. Overtime work are not paid, and they're even forced to work over the weekend. And substandard occupational health and safety measures and very poor on-site first aid facilities. Unfortunately, on the 22nd of June 2018, the project closed. The project gone bankrupt. The National Highway Authority of India has to take into account because of its failure to pay more than 450 million Indian rupees to the main contractors. 450 million rupees failure to pay the contractors. And what happened? The workers that are employed eventually suffered. At least in the case that we filed to ADB, there are 116 workers claiming for 17 million Indian rupees. 17 million Indian rupees unpaid wages, overtime pay in this project. And together with NGO Forum on ADB, we filed a complaint. And again, unfortunately, ADB dismissed our complaint on the grounds, on the technical grounds, but not on the merit of the case. They argued that the complaint was submitted to CRP more than 2 years after the loan was closed. That was 2017. The complaint, they say, is an action that is not related to ADB's action or omission in the course of formulating, processing, and implementing ADB-assisted project. And finally, they argued that the complaint relates to actions that are responsibility of the other parties, meaning the National India Authority or the contractor. So they're washing their hands, right? If they are to argue that the project closed in 2017, so we cannot make any claim or on their accountability, it's falsely argued. This because in 2017, 3 laborers were trapped for 9 days. They were inside, there was a cabin accident, and after only 9 days, 2 were rescued and 1 eventually died. And that was 2015. This is part of the case that we submitted to ADB, but they say well, you are too late. But the accident happened in 2017, while the loan that they approved is still, let's say, in effect. This only shows that the ADB safeguards, particularly for workers and trade union rights, are all inadequate and antiquated. We cannot let ADB get out of this. There is blood on ADB. So you have to join me when I say ADB, you say blood on you. ADB, blood on you. ADB, blood on you. ADB, blood on you. If we're not
Thank
out of
you,
the
John. Yes, you wanted to say something? Yeah, yeah.
final words, they're still not
Yeah.
out of the system. We will see them in court.
Great.
There was a landmark decision in 2019, at least in the US, that the Supreme Court has voted in favor that IFC, an international financing institution, is not completely shielded from immunity. They can be sued. That can be explored. So ADB, watch out. Thank you for your attention.
ADB, watch out. ADB, blood on you. One struggle, one fight. Workers of the world unite, and we will unite behind the workers of the world. I think another slogan that he gave us was very telling, and I think we should use it. Ryan and friends, ADB, inadequate and antiquated. We need to say this more and more. Thank you for those great words, Apolinar Tolentino of BWI, and for your fight on behalf of workers, on behalf of those on the ground who toil hard and do not even get their just wages. So obviously the ADB is completely inadequate, completely antiquated, and really we now need ADB out of Asia. Next, we have from the Coalition for Human Rights and Development, Carmina Obanil. Carmina?
Hi. Hi, Vidya. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, so yeah, unfortunately, yes, there is no space for communities and human rights into this virtual annual meeting of the ADB. And yeah, and that's unfortunate. If there's space, we would have told them that threats and attacks against human rights defenders in the context of development activities that they're actually investing on are widespread. They would have heard the story of an environmentalist in Myanmar who the government is now hunting. Why? Because he and his organization dared expose the human rights violation of the quarry site owner against Karen farmers. The quarry owner was serving ADB's East-West Corridor project. Or they would have heard about how their investments have exacerbated risks for human rights defenders on the ground, such as an activist in Azerbaijan and independent labor monitors in Uzbekistan. The Azerbaijan activist was criticizing the ability of the government to use the importance of the Southern Gas Corridor project to solicit support and use the money to successfully neutralize criticism of the country's crackdown on domestic opposition. He was jailed for 5 years, released in August 2018, but is on probation. So he's not free to travel, speak out, or engage in political activism. Why is ADB complicit? ADB invested 1 billion here in this project. ADB has remained silent on threats and attacks, or their responses came too late. Too late for defenders and communities, and they are left without protection from remedy for harm. In the case of Myanmar, the one that I was telling you earlier, ADB actually engaged a new quarry operator. They relocated the quarry, but the persecution against the current farmers and the environmentalists hasn't stopped. It has continued on. So ADB should realize that when they impose development activities without the consent or meaningful consultations of local communities and marginalized groups, like in your case in Kolkata, then reprisals happen. Defenders are threatened, people have people are killed in some cases. So this is the reason why this lack of space in this annual meeting is actually very unacceptable. You know why? Our rights matter, our lives matter. ADV should listen. Thank you, Vidya.
Thank you, Carmina, for always speaking up, not just for human rights defenders, but for workers across the world. Thank you for all the work the coalition does. Our lives do matter, all lives matter. And now we go on to the next part of our rally, and Emma Bacon joins us from Union Aid Abroad, AFIDA, on the fight that they are carrying into the ADB on the asbestos issue. What are we telling the ADB this time, Emma?
Thank you, Vidya. Thank you for having me. We are saying that international development cannot include asbestos. Thank you for having me today. I come to you from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, their stolen lands in Australia. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'm from Union Aid Abroad AFIDA, which is the global justice solidarity organisation of the Australian Union movement. Asbestos has been banned in Australia since 2003, but before then had very high usage, and still thousands of people die each year because of asbestos-related diseases. Asbestos is a deadly mineral fibre that can cause cancer and other diseases. We've known about how harmful it is for decades, and it's banned in almost 70 countries. Today, almost all of the asbestos used is in Asia, where the asbestos lobby is active in spreading misinformation to say it is a safe fibre. Asbestos is estimated to kill over 200,000 people a year, and 1.2 million workers are exposed every year. The people who are most at risk are workers who are engaged in asbestos mining or processing, or exposed to asbestos products during construction or demolition. But we know it is also dangerous to communities if it is not disposed of safely, if it ends up in people's houses, if it is broken up and used in backyards, or ends up in exposed dumps next to schools, next to children in communities. Asbestos can cause a range of cancers, including mesothelioma, a cancer of the lungs with no cure. People with asbestos-related diseases can die agonizing deaths, gasping for air. At last year's annual meeting, we raised the dangers of asbestos directly with the ADB staff and the president, thanks to the help of the NGO Forum. After that, we had some productive meetings where they said, oh, they don't support asbestos, they will make a change. But since then, the bank has signaled the change, that the policy would only come through in the safeguard review, and that we didn't know if they'd be sending out a memo sooner. We do support the change in the safeguard policy, it has to happen. But we know that ADB can send a clear memo and message now and make a public announcement. We need a clear statement now that covers the COVID-19 relief and development funding being dispersed. The current ADB safeguard policy does not allow for the use of raw asbestos in projects, but it does allow for the use of asbestos bonded cement sheets, and they are the most common used in Asia. Others have said that the ADB has announced $20 billion US in funding in members countries to respond to the pandemic and economic crisis. Each funded project that puts asbestos in the community and workplaces creates a health crisis that will last decades. In countries that still use asbestos, the hospitals and the health clinics that are being built, or the public and private construction that's being planned, may contain asbestos. So we're calling on the ADB and all of the multilateral development banks to be clear and say COVID relief and international development cannot include asbestos. If the bank changes this policy, we know there won't be funding for products, there'll be financial support for alternatives, and it will mean policy leadership amongst the other banks and also in the countries that are on their way to banning. Workers are organizing on the ground to keep themselves and communities safe. Activists across Asia are winning, getting closer to bans. The ADB needs to lay down a statement right now saying that none of the COVID funding and none of their funding from now can include asbestos. We urge the ADB to publicly announce that now and commit to international leadership on the issue. There is no safe level of asbestos exposure, and asbestos left in workplaces and the community will have a toxic legacy and a cancer-causing legacy into the future. Safe, sustainable development cannot include asbestos. So thank you so much for having me today, and I will end with a chant like others. So if people can unmute themselves.
Yes,
and
please, everyone in mute, unmute. Yes, let's
And I
chant
will-
against asbestos and against the ADB.
And I will say asbestos, not here. And then you will say not anywhere. So asbestos, not here.
Not here.
Not anywhere.
Not anywhere.
Not here. Not
Not
anywhere.
everywhere.
Not here.
Asbestos, not here.
Not
Anywhere. Yes.
Anywhere.
Thank you very
Great.
much.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Emma Bacon. I think Sridhar wants to speak for 30 seconds on the asbestos issue. Yes, IC convener Sridhar Ramamurthy.
Thank you, Vidya, and thank you, Apida, for raising this issue. I want to take this opportunity to mourn and condole the death of one of our asbestos fighters in India, Nirmala Gurung, who unfortunately expired on the 9th. She was last time in Rotterdam Convention in Geneva, demanding ban of asbestos in India, and we have been losing a lot of asbestos victims. Over 1,700, in the last couple of years have been diagnosed by us. So as she mentioned, the International Ban Asbestos Network, the Asia Ban Asbestos Network, and the IBAN are with the demand that ADB and all multilateral development banks, which are the source for continuing use of asbestos, must stop immediately. Thank you very much for this time.
Thank you, Sridhar. Thank you. Yes, ADB needs to listen to this. Asbestos, not here, not anywhere. And then we come to the most important part that most of us use to rally against the ADB on a continuous basis, the safeguards that the ADB sets out for their projects on the ground. Ikram Mamadov from the Youth Group on Protection of Environment Tajikistan is going to tell us what he and his group from Tajikistan think about the safeguards. And after that, we will have a joint statement to the ADB. That's the penultimate thing in our rally today from Ryan Hassan of the executive, who is the executive director of the NGO Forum on ADB. But first, Ikram, who's going to be our new IC. From Tajikistan.
I don't think Ikram is in the room because of his internet connection.
Oh, poor internet connection. So then shall we go on to what we are clearly saying? Emma had some very, very clear asks. Everybody had very, very clear pushbacks at the ADB. Shall we then have the joint statement to the ADB given to us by Ryan Hassan, Executive Director, NGO Forum on ADB? So unfortunately, he would have been really our star in the CSOs pushing back at the ADB tomorrow and day after. But here, Ryan, you'll always be our star at any rally against the ADB. So let's hear it from you, Ryan.
Thank you. Well, I only burn as bright as the members that I have in the network. So they're the ones who are really bringing in the work. It's unfortunate that, we cannot shake the physical foundations of the bank during the annual meeting. That's sorely missed. So what I did was I tweaked the final statement just a little bit. The official statement, I think, has been sent to everybody. But just for the sake for making a speech today or making an input today, I changed the language just a bit. So bear with me. By being a financier of authoritarian regimes during this pandemic, the ADB has thrown away over a decade of inclusive practice of open dialogue with civil society in its annual meetings. Corporate and state greed are the voices of the ADB, which they love to hear in this annual meeting. They do not want to hear your voice. They do not want to hear the voice of the people. They do not want to hear the voice of the marginalized. What we are witnessing now across lower middle income countries is an escalating debt and rampant corruption in the name of COVID-19 recovery. The ADB is directly responsible in aiding and abetting this horrific circumstance, where ruling powers are misappropriating critical funds meant for public health and social protection to private anonymous bank accounts. The horrific fires in California, the deluge of floods in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and the typhoons that are following here in the Philippines remind us of the overarching threat of the climate crisis. The ADB continues to support fossil fuels and coal-related infrastructure. This nonchalance, this indifference in pursuing profit over planet is bringing us closer and closer to an extinction scale event. Does the ADB even realize? ADB, with its maze-like bureaucracy and thousands of expert staff, still do not have the oversight on how many of its financial intermediaries and COVID-19 lending is manifesting into dirty fossil fuel projects, including possibly coal. Borrowing governments have almost zero accountability, with civil society being arrested every day, silenced, kidnapped, free press muffled, and gagged. We are speaking of unemployment and debt and poverty and joblessness in unprecedented scales across Asia. Working people with living wages, with honor and dignity, are now begging in the streets of Delhi. They're begging in the streets of Manila. They're begging in the streets of Dhaka, of Karachi. 53 years of ADB's operations, and we can see one pandemic has exposed the fallacy of its overall development agenda. Each ADB loan is a negative number, which adds to the deepening socioeconomic crisis. How can more negative numbers add up to a positive outcome of economic freedom and sustainable development? Depreciation of currencies, rising inflation and prices, and the loss of asset value beckons the coming of a deep financial crisis. Once these loans have run their course, economies will be left with a bill in a corrupt, exploitative economic system, and that bill is coming to us. It is too high to pay, and we are standing at the sharpest edge of the cliff right now. In this virtual rally, we call out the 53-year-old ADB to take its historical responsibility. We, the people, call out the ADB on its 53 years of destruction in Asia Pacific, and we continue to challenge ADB's immunity. So the slogan is, what do we want? End ADB's immunity. You chant. When do we want it? Now.
How?
So I'll say that 3
Please
times.
unmute yourselves.
So everyone, if you unmute yourself, I will chant, what do you want? You will say, end ADB's immunity. When do we want it?
Immunity.
Now.
What do we want?
And ADB immunity.
Immunity.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
And
immunity.
Immunity.
When do we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
And
Release of immunity.
Immunity.
When do we want it?
Now.
Thank you very much. Let's send that statement to the bank and give them some help.
Thank you so much, Ryan, from leading from the front and also being at the back, pushing at all of us. And thank you all for coming. I know for some it has been so early in the morning that it's been difficult to join, but all of us who are here today and all of those who have joined us on FB, thank you for being there. Thank you for speaking up for the communities impacted by the dirty policies of the ADB. And thank you for keeping the fights going. Tomorrow and day after, the ADB should not be comfortable that they've kept us out of their AGM. I'm sure they will not be. I request the press to take this far and wide. I request the communities on the ground to keep the pressure on the bank so that their destruction, their lack of compliance with their own standards is brought to an end. We need to see that there's no immunity for ADB. There's nowhere to hide. And we will see that they feel the heat. A virtual meeting that keeps us out will not keep away our heat. We will not be silenced. Thank you, everyone. Let's keep going against the ADB and for our communities. One
you.
last
Thank you.
time, the chant, Ryan.
I would go with Dong to take us through the chant. He's better
Yes,
at it than
Yeah.
me.
Dong. Come on.
Okay, let's do again the ADB blood on you. When I say ADB, you say
Blood
Blood
on
on you.
you.
Blood on you.
ADB.
Blood
Blood
on
on
you.
To
you.
you.
ADB.
Blood on
To
you.
you.
ADB.
Blood
Blood
on
on
Blood
you.
on you.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good.
Thank you. Thank you all. Stay safe and don't keep the ADB safe. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you all.
Thank you, Vidya. Thank you, Mehedi, very much. Thank you, Ma'am Claudette.